Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the worship service of the First Unitarian Church of Hobart. Had to do that for the locals. Where we strive to put love at the center of how we show up in the world. So each week, during our Sunday morning worship service, we join together in affirming that love is the doctrine of this church, the quest for its truth, its sacrament, service is its prayer, and this is our covenant. To dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Since not everyone can attend in person, we are streaming this worship service online, and we extend a special welcome to all that are joining us virtually. The joys and sorrows portion of our service, however, is private, and we will temporarily pause the stream for that. Other than that, this worship service is being recorded and will be available for future viewing on our website. Today, our worship service will be led by our minister, Pastor Tom! Please destroy your devices, and as you do so, allow yourself to enter a sacred time together. And take a breath, and another, and join the spirits of reverence while I read the reverence of spirit. For millennia, people have gathered together to hear stories, to root for the underdog, to jeer the evil and the unkind. We see in our stories mirrors of our own lives where we hope good things will happen to good people and that evil will be vanquished. This morning, we gather for story, for cheering and jeering, for hope and justice. May this ancient story shed new light on our own lives, and may we know ourselves connected. To millions of listeners who have come before us, and to millions of listeners who will come after. Let us worship together.
Kumbaya, 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 my Lord, kumbaya, 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 oh Lord, kumbaya. Some
What a great way to start a Sunday. Thank you very much for that, choir. The flaming chalice is a symbol of Unitarian Universalism. It suggests the transformations that take place when we are held within religious community. When we light the chalice in worship, we illuminate a world that we feel called upon to serve with love and a sense of justice. Please join us in lighting our chalice by reading together the words on the screen or in your order of service.
We are a faith that comes together not around a creed, a set of beliefs that we're supposed to agree upon, but rather around covenant, around the agreements that we make with each other through our own democratic processes. And so each week we engage in a re-covenanting with each other, a coming back into relationship, into agreement with each other. And so I'll read some parts of our covenant, and I would invite you to respond with, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. So for all the ways that we have neglected to consider our thoughts before speaking, communicate in a clear and positive manner, and to pause before acting, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. For all the ways that we have neglected to speak directly to those concerned with an issue, to offer and receive appropriate criticism and praise, and provide timely, specific, and clear feedback, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. And for all the ways that we have not been appropriately supportive of others without taking sides, may we forgive ourselves and each other and begin again in love. So having re-covenanted with one another, I invite you to just look at these beautiful faces in this space. Maybe wave your hands, maybe smile at them, and include the folks who are joining us over Zoom and YouTube as well. Just greeting everybody into being in this space together. And then I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn 1040 in the Teal hymnals, Hush. 1040 in the Teal hymnals, Hush.
Soon one morning
minds, anything that has accumulated over the past hours or days or weeks or years, to offer it up as a revealing of ourselves, truly as an offering to one another. And so I invite you, if you have a joy or a sorrow this morning, to just make that offering whole by sharing your name with us, so that we know who you are. Then we have a joy or a sorrow this morning. Yes. Relationship to yourself. We've talked about your relationship to other people. We've talked about your relationship to the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. And this morning, I would invite our reflection on how can you tell when your relationship with the past and the future is thriving? How can you tell when your relationship with the past and the future is thriving? And maybe you don't think like a relationship with the past and the future. I mean, I was there, and I'm going to be there, and right now I'm here. But there's a way that usually the past and the future lives in our awareness right now in the present. There's some way that we hold it. There's some way that we carry it, whether there's fear or anxiety or excitement or hope or regret or grief, or all of that stuff is about our relationship to the past and to the future. And so I'm going to invite folks to just reflect silently to yourself for a little bit on this question and sort of see what you sift out. As Jeremy plays some music, you'll just be thinking to yourself. And then once he wraps up with that, then I'll invite you to just share some of the highlights with each other. You don't need to go into all the details, but just a few of the highlights with each other to express and to receive what somebody else might have noticed within themselves. So, how can you tell when your relationship with the past and the future is thriving? Okay, so having had a moment to reflect silently to yourself, I'll invite you to turn to one person sitting next to you, maybe two at the absolute most, and you'll have 2 minutes to share between the two of you. What were some things that came up to you? What occurred to you in your head? What did you notice? And I'll let you know when the 2 minutes are up. Okay, thank your partner for sharing with you, for listening to you. And what did you hear yourself say, or what did you hear somebody else say that stuck out to you? What did you notice in that sharing? Yeah.
This is a shout out to Jerry. Good to see you back. When there is no past and there is no future and there's just the now. That's how you know.
So you know that your relationship to them is thriving, and when you're just focused on the now. Okay, got it. Great, thank you, Heather. How about other folks? Yeah.
One of the things I kind of was surprised to have pop in my mind is that we always apply the forgiveness to the past. In terms of if we can forgive that, then we can be in the present. But then I realized that we may also carry forward a fear that we won't be forgiven in the future, that can leave us a little bit immobilized and fearful of taking action.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
My name's Maggie, and I think I know that I'm thriving when I'm not having a long conversation with myself about something I'm trying to work out or wrestle with, or the words that I wished I'd said, or when it's kind of quiet and I'm just chill.
Beautiful. Thank you, Maggie. Yeah. Last one.
In thinking about this, I remembered something my father said to me, which I think is a Zen koan. He said, "When you're washing the dishes, wash the dishes."
Sweet. Thank you, everybody. So we're going to have a story now. So for this series, we're working with the book of Esther, which has a different version in the Protestant Bible and the Christian Bible. The one in the Protestant Bible is pretty similar to the one in the Jewish Tanakh. But the Catholic one has some extra stuff thrown in there about God. We read a brief synopsis of the whole book a couple weeks ago. Last week we focused just on the first chapter, which kind of brings in the humor of the story. The book of Esther is definitely a comic work. There's a lot of places for laughter in that. This morning I'm just going to do chapter 4 of the book, which has a few less laugh lines. It's the turning point of the story. So the stuff that comes before it is the sort of setting up all the humorous scenarios, and the stuff that comes after is all the humorous reversals. But chapter 4 is where you get the middle point between the first part of the story and the second. And so just some quick context, the king has married this Jewish girl named Esther, but her uncle Mordecai advised her to keep secret the fact that she's Jewish. And her uncle Mordecai, meanwhile, gets into a conflict with one of the important people in the king's palace, this guy named Haman. And Haman wants to get back at the Jews as a whole by getting the king to commit a genocide against them. So that's the stuff that has happened so far. And so chapter 4 says, when Mordecai learned all that had happened, Haman's plots, Mordecai tore his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes, and he went through the city crying out loudly and bitterly until he came in front of the palace gate. For one could not enter the palace gate without wearing sackcloth. Also in every province that the king's command and decree reached, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing, and everybody lay in sackcloth and ashes. When Esther's maids and eunuchs came and informed her, the queen was greatly agitated. She sent clothing for Mordecai to wear so that he might take off his sackcloth, but he refused. Thereupon Esther summoned Hathach, one of the eunuchs whom the king had appointed to serve her, and sent him to Mordecai to learn the why and wherefore of it all. And Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate and into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. Sent him to Mordecai to learn the why and wherefore of all. Hathach went out to Mordecai in the city square in front of the palace gate, and Mordecai told him all that had happened to him, and all about the money that Haman had offered to pay into the royal treasury for the destruction of the Jews. He also gave him the written text of the law that had been proclaimed in Shushan for the destruction. He bade him to show it to Esther and inform her, and charge her to go to the king and to appeal to him and to plead with him for her people. And when Hathach came and delivered Mordecai's message to Esther, Esther told Hathach to take back to Mordecai the following reply: all the king's courtiers and the people of the king's provinces know that if any person enters the king's presence in the inner court without having been summoned, there is but one law for him, that he be put to death. Only if the king extends the golden scepter to him may he live. Now I have not been summoned to visit the king for the last 30 days. And when Mordecai was told what Esther had said, Mordecai had this message delivered to Esther: do not imagine that you, of all the Jews, will escape with your life by being in the king's palace. On the contrary, if you keep silent in this crisis, relief and deliverance will come to the Jews from another quarter, while you and your father's house will perish. And who knows, maybe you have attained royal position for just such a crisis. And then Esther sent back to Mordecai this answer: go assemble all the Jews who live in Shushan and fast in my behalf. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will observe the same fast. And then I shall go to the king, though it is contrary to the law. And if I am to perish, I shall perish. So Mordecai went about the city and did just as Esther had commanded him. So ends our story this morning. I invite you to join me in reading our responsive reading, the words of which will be on the screen here. This is We Need to Be Resurrected by Amanda Udis Kessler. Despair is sapping our spirits, damaging our souls, hurting our hearts. We need to be resurrected into hope, faith, and trust. Today, may we be resurrected. Violence is shortening our lives and robbing us of our joy. We need to be resurrected into peace and its many blessings. Today, may we be resurrected. Selfishness is tearing our social fabric, hiding us from one another, turning us inward. We need to be resurrected into generosity, compassion, and open-heartedness. Today, may we be resurrected. Fear is pitting us against each other, stripping our delight, poisoning our relationships. We need to be resurrected into courage and connection. Today, may we be resurrected. Injustice is devaluing and dehumanizing us all, punishing some terribly, frightening others deeply. We need to be resurrected into justice and healing. May we be resurrected. Hatred is breeding despair, violence, selfishness, fear, and injustice among us and among our children. We need to be resurrected into love. Today, may we be resurrected. So may it be. Amen. I invite you to rise in body or spirit and join in singing hymn 1020 in the Teal hymnals, Wo Ya Ya. Please be seated. So I've talked before about going to the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly, which happens each year in a different city. It moves around from year to year. This year it's going to be in Baltimore in June. And I remember the first time going there because it was the first time that I had been among so many Unitarian Universalists. You know, there's not that many of us in the U.S., just as a percentage of the population, we're fairly small. There's various congregations. I think our biggest congregation is several hundred folks, which is pretty small potatoes when you compare it to like Joel Osteen's church, which is tens of thousands of people in a stadium together. And so going to General Assembly each year, gathering together in a conference center where there are actually thousands of Unitarian Universalists in the room together, worshiping together, prowling the streets together, has a particular flavor to it, a particular it feels different to be amongst fellow Unitarian Universalists. There's a particular culture, a way of being that one can notice in that. A way of being in a culture that brings forth a past and leads forward into a future. That is very different from the sort of future that is proffered in our mainstream society, which has so much to do with apocalypse and collapse and preparing for the inevitable demise of everything. That is based on a bad reading of the book of Revelation, but it's also something that very secular folks who invest in getting protective bunkers built somewhere in the world to guard against the heathens coming to take them down. There's very much a preparing for collapse mentality among a large portion of the folks in Silicon Valley these days, unfortunately. As Unitarian Universalist theologian Rebecca Parker has written, scripts about the end of the world tend to become compulsive, self-fulfilling prophecies. Our hope, though, can be that from within the heart of this world, paradise will arise. Not that there is something that is coming upon us or will drastically change in that way, but rather that from within the world that already exists, paradise will rise. It will arise from the seeds of Eden sown everywhere, from the life that is within us and around us in our communities and cultures, from the gifts of our resistance, compassion, and creativity, and from the very stones crying out for their praise of the presence of the God who is here now, already wiping the tears from our eyes. As John Burens and Rebecca Parker went on to say, hope rises. It rises from the heart of life, here and now. Beating with joy and sorrow, hope longs. It longs for good to be affirmed, for justice and love to prevail, for suffering to be alleviated, and for life to flourish in peace. Hope remembers the dreams of those who have gone before and reaches for connection with them across the boundary of death. Hope acts to bless, to protest, and to repair. Hope can be disappointed, especially when it is individual rather than shared, or when even as shared aspiration it encounters entrenched opposition. To thrive, hope requires a home, a sustaining structure of community, of meaning, of ritual. Only with such a habituation can hope manifest the spiritual stamina it needs to confront evil, endure through trouble, and hold fast to that which is good. So what does that sort of community look like? That community, that meaning, that ritual, how does it cohere in the context of time? Too often people look to the past and the future not as something to aim towards or to hope towards or to situate ourselves in, but rather to sow the seeds of fear. So not in this nourishing way that Parker and Burens talk about, but rather to talk about how we should be afraid because all about us is terrifying. Often people evoke the Roman Empire as being this example of what we should look to, a model for what we should fear. Ronald Reagan in 1969, so remember he's the governor of California in 1969, so what's going on in California at that point? He said, the young men of Rome began avoiding military service. They took to wearing feminine-like hairdos and garments until it became difficult to tell the sexes apart. Among the teachers and scholars was a group called the Cynics, who let their hair and their beards grow, who were slovenly in their dress. The morals declined, rioting was commonplace, and all the time the twin diseases of confiscatory taxation and creeping inflation were waiting to deliver the death blow. When they finally overcame the energy and ambition of Rome's middle class, Rome fell. And Richard Nixon, similarly, in his White House tapes, said a bunch of I'm going to edit them for appropriateness to be said from the pulpit, and I will use the more appropriate words instead of the epithets that he used, where he said the last 6 Roman emperors were gay. You see homosexuality, dope, immorality in general, these are the enemies of strong societies. That's why the communists and left-wingers are pushing this stuff. They're trying to destroy us. Or Pat Buchanan in the mid-2000s likened illegal immigrants to the Goths, the Germanic tribes who ravaged the Roman Empire preceding its collapse. And in particular, Emperor Valens' admission of Gothic refugees into the empire. Buchanan was convinced that Valens' welcoming of the Goths was the decision that sealed the fate of the empire. See, this is how America ends, he said, with an influx of illegal immigrants. Or our current vice president. We are in the late Republican period. If we're going to push back against it, we're going to have to get wild, pretty far out there, and go in directions that a lot of conservatives right now are uncomfortable with. And by late Republican period, he meant the period preceding Caesar's dictatorship. As author and scholar Mike Duncan has written, actually, the Goths being allowed to cross the river because they were trying to get away from the people who were pressing on their own borders and then being hemmed in and so horribly mistreated, were forced to sell their own children into slavery for rancid meat in order to stay alive. Because they were so horribly mistreated by the Romans at the border, that's what triggered the Gothic War that had such a dramatic impact on the Roman army in the central Baltic region. Many on the right who say that initially there were these robust, hardy Italian men who were swarthy and upright and straight. And then once the Roman Empire comes along, they decay and they become orientalized and feminized. It's basically like, well, the gays did it. But if you look at the golden age of the Roman Empire, the 5 best emperors who are lifted up by scholars, at least 2 of them were clearly gay. In the same way they use the Bible to justify their inherent bigotry and homophobia, they use Roman history in the same way. They're not saying those things because Roman history is teaching us that lesson. They want to say something homophobic, and then they use the Roman Empire in service of that. Right-wingers say that the Roman citizens who conquered the Mediterranean are now relying on these non-citizens to fight their wars for them. But that's exactly what was going on when they conquered the Mediterranean. In fact, it was by integrating those people that the Romans cemented their hold over the Mediterranean and then kept it going for hundreds of years. Anytime you find the Romans being expansive in their ideas about citizenship, you find them stronger and growing. And anytime they get really closed up and close-minded and try to resist these things, they eventually do with the Goths, that's when things start to fall apart. And when you get to the end of the empire and the roles that the Goths play in that, it's not just that the Goths came down and conquered Rome. The Goths wanted in. They wanted to be a part of the Roman way of life, to be a part of the Roman system and not be kept outside of it. And the political leadership was trying to keep them outside of it. That's why they sacked Rome. It's because they weren't some rapacious barbarians who just wanted to sack Rome. It was political maneuvering so that they could have a better life. If somebody on the right is invoking the Roman Republic or the Roman Empire to justify something that they're doing to make us afraid of something, there's a 99% chance that they are wrong about what they're saying. No actual understanding of anything that happened. And especially these days when we're talking about immigration into the United States and they're being described as these floods of people, there's an invasion and they invoke the Goths, they invoke the Huns. None of this is even remotely analogous to what we're doing today. And throughout Roman history, when we find the Romans succeeding, when they integrate the Italians, that's when they get stronger. When they integrate a part of the Mediterranean world and allow them to participate fully and benefit fully from the system they're in, that's when the Roman Empire gets stronger. When they resist those things, that's when the Roman Empire gets weaker. When Ronald Reagan talked about, oh, it wasn't the true Romans anymore, that's why it fell apart. That's just not true. The guys who put the Roman Empire back together in the 260s, the 270s, the 280s were a bunch of dudes from the Balkans. It was a bunch of guys from Croatia. The best emperors came from places like Spain or North Africa. The idea that people who aren't true Romans were the reason why the empire fell. No, they're the reason why the Roman Empire was sustained for as long as it was. If it had been up to the Italians, it would have fallen long before the guys from the Balkans showed up. There is a similar abuse of biblical texts that we often face. Last week, when we read that little section of the book of Esther, I invited folks into some cheering and jeering in response. And so when the bad guy does something, people go boo, and when the hero does something, they go yay. So that's something that happens on the holiday of Purim every year. And one of the things that somebody brought up to me after the service was, well, the parts that you were having us say yay to, is that historically accurate? With the society this is from, wouldn't that have been a more patriarchal society? Would they really be cheering on the rebellious woman? I think this gets to a really important question of how we read old text like this. I took a class in seminary called Saving Paradise that was taught by Rebecca Parker, who I quoted before, and Rita Nakashima Brock, a co-worker of hers, a fellow scholar. And the book Saving Paradise is about how for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, there wasn't this widespread idea that Jesus died for our sins to save us. That was an innovation that got spread when the Carolingian Empire came across about the year 1000. And as she goes into some of the details on this, there were some people in the class who raised their hand and was like, wow, but does that really make sense? I mean, aren't there these parts of the Bible that explicitly say that that's what happened? And somebody quotes John 3:16. And for any of you who know, John 3:16, it says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, so that everyone who believes in him may not perish, but may have eternal life." Now, I was raised Unitarian Universalist. I've heard this quote before. I couldn't tell you that it was John 3:16 if there wasn't that wrestler who had the thing tattooed on the. I haven't been schooled in this. It's not what I was raised in. But certainly when I read it, I thought, well, yeah, God gave over his Son to die so that anybody could live after life and so on. And she patiently pointed out to all of us, me who had just taken it in from the popular consciousness, nowhere in that quote does it say that God gave his Son to die. It could just as easily be read, God gave his Son to live. And nowhere in that quote does it say anything about eternal life, meaning going to heaven or hell. It just says eternal life. And it doesn't go into the details about what eternal life means. There's this assumed cultural meaning that we read into things. And so there's a lot in reading the Bible well that involves learning to not take those assumed interpretations with us. And especially feminist biblical scholarship over the past few decades has done an amazing job of helping us read the text from different vantage points. So, Bible mostly written, we're pretty good idea, mostly written by men. Men were the ones who knew how to write and read and so on. And so, of course, what's written down is going to be biased in that direction. But feminist biblical scholarship expertly points out that if you have a bunch of texts talking about the need for women to be obedient, then that probably indicates that they weren't being obedient. This wasn't some society in which everyone just understood women to be second-class citizens. Rather, it just means that there was one group of folks who happened to have the pens who didn't like how another group of folks who didn't have as many pens were behaving themselves. And so we can hold together the truth that the surface of the text, the straightforward intentions of the authors, and also what's under the surface in the context of that, about how the society as a whole functioned, and together reclaim our human history, our whole human history. The Bible isn't just misused in those ways around substitutionary atonement or bad theology in those particular ways. It's also misused for really terrible political purposes. The book of Esther, for instance, on the religious right, is a tale of dueling genocides. It's one group saying, we're going to commit genocide against you, and then the other group saying, no, we're going to commit genocide against you, and then having the upper hand because they're on the side of God. This is the meaning not just among the religious right, it's also amongst a lot of folks who are Zionist Israelis, not all of them certainly, but back in 1994, there was an American doctor who used it as an excuse to open fire on Palestinians praying at a mosque in Hebron. It was specifically around the celebration of Purim. It killed 29 folks, wounded another 125 folks. Those readings of the book of Esther conveniently skip past that part where Mordecai says, do not imagine that you will escape with your life by being in the kingly palace. Right now, some folks have heard of Project 2025. Yes, a few folks in the room. So Project 2025 was this document that was put together by a bunch of groups about how to remake American society. It's being used by the current administration right now. There's also this thing called Project Esther, named after the book of Esther. And Project Esther talks about using this story to carry out missions that are not clear in the moment, but that serve God's wishes. It's the use of something Jewish to advance a far-right project. It alleges a coordinated network, a Hamas support network, around the pro-Palestinian movement. It attempts to conceptually unify anti-Semitism with anti-terrorism in order to invoke the national security state. There are laws already in most states criminalizing the movement for boycott, divestment, and sanctions on the state of Israel. And Project Esther adds on to that effort. There are people who are in the White House who are very interested in using claims of anti-Semitism to go after their enemies. What they talk about as anti-Semitism is only being pro-Palestinian. Nothing about any actual anti-Semitism. Project Esther was put together mostly by Christian nationalists. There's only one group of Jews involved in this project, and it's a small group of Orthodox rabbis who gathered in 2017. It doesn't even include, the folks who put it together doesn't even include the Republican Jewish coalition. They're combining anti-Israel, anti-Semitic, and anti-American as the same thing. And part of why they're using this as the point of the spear is the reluctance of Democrats to stand up for pro-Palestine organizations. So there was a bill last year, HR 9495, that one of the things that it said was that the Treasury Department could unilaterally say that any nonprofit in the country is supporting terrorism without proving anything, just this nonprofit supporting terrorism, so we're going to take away their nonprofit status. Unilateral discretion by the Treasury Department. The first time through, Representative Mervan voted for that bill. And thankfully, through the Interfaith Action Network, there was some organizing that happened that contacted him, reached out to him, and got him to change his vote. So the second time that it came through, he voted against it. So thank you to the folks who are involved in that. To the folks who are building an organization that is capable of responding, of gathering energy in the community around that. The relevance of this is particularly key. I don't know if you've been paying attention to what happened in New York State recently, but the City University of New York posted a position for a Palestine studies scholar. And the governor of the state of New York ordered that CUNY disband it because it was anti-Semitic, by virtue of the fact that it was studying the Palestinian situation. So Democratic governor, Democratic state, still happening. In many ways, many of us U.S. citizens have been able to be somewhat passive, feeling the economic fruits of being the world's primary superpower. And it can be scary to look at a future in which that may no longer be the case. Theodore Parker talked about the long arc of history. So let's explore one framing of that arc in which our lives are situated. Professor Shay Howell has written the USA and its G7 partners, who Trump is alienating rapidly, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Germany, and Italy, produce about 26% of the global economy. In contrast, the BRICS, or Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and affiliated countries, account for about 35% of global output. Over the last 15 years, they've grown from 5 to 22 countries. Many are leading in the production of goods that hold the key to greener, regenerative futures. And moral inspiration is coming from South Africa as it both refuses to be bullied and dedicates itself to upholding world efforts toward peace and justice. Economist Richard Wolff has written, "I believe the United States is heading headlong into a dead end economically, and therefore also politically and ideologically. We as a nation were remarkable in the 19th and 20th centuries. We provided roughly from 1820 to roughly 1970 rising real wages for the American working class every decade for 150 years. And that made us special. No other working class in any other capitalist country got that story. That's why millions of people came to the United States from Europe during the 19th century and early 20th century, because they expected a better deal here than they could get in Europe. And they got it. And that is now maybe on its waning time. And the question of the world right now is, will there be a new empire to replace the American way of life the way that the American one did the British? The United States and its G7 allies together comprise somewhere around, let's be generous, 12 to 15% of the world's people. The BRICS today, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and those other countries, comprise roughly 60% of the world's people. The future may be with them. And as Howell goes on to say, we can imagine a very different future. We can imagine a world where economies are organized to benefit life and regenerate the earth. If this empire falls, new worlds can be born, embodying values that affirm the sacredness of life. Such change might bring fear. That totally makes sense. But it can also bring great possibilities. As author Ursula K. Le Guin wrote, to find a new world, maybe you have to have lost one. Maybe you have to be lost. The dance of renewal, the dance that made the world, was always danced here at the edge of things, on the brink, on the foggy coast. There is hope to be found in community, in mutual aid, in what we can build together, in joining together to build that new world. Not just to get to that world, but also to experience being on the journey together along the way. Perhaps we have attained our positions of relative privilege for just such a crisis. My suggestion to you, my invitation to you, usually when I offer some kind of invitation of something to focus on over the coming week, it's a practice to take on every day or something along those lines. This week, an option that I'd offer to you is to attend a webinar on Thursday night held by If Not Now, specifically around Project Esther. You can go on their website, ifnotnowmovement.org, and register for that. It's going on Thursday evening. Just as one step to countering the scripts about the end of the world or the end of civilization that become self-fulfilling prophecies. Taking stock of how those scripts are being used for satisfying ends. Knowing instead that we are connected and joining with others, as Rebecca Parker invites us, to listen to our being called together by our ancestors and our descendants, to knit together our histories and our destinies, in firing our intellects, in touching our hearts, in turning us to face the world's painful realities with honest and critical analysis, in focusing our efforts on deeds of service and social activism to help birth new worlds that affirm the sacredness of life. May our feet ever be guided on that path together. Blessed be.
The center, right, Barb? Barb told me, Craig, you always talk over here. The microphone's there. All right. So it'll be like Jeff when he's coming in for an airplane landing. She'll be going, runway. So this is a time of our offering, and we choose to welcome it in the spirit of life and join in our aliveness in doing it and share our resources. This month, we're sharing our loose change for social change, or our loose change for social change, which goes to the Star Center, which I was surprised I'd not heard of, but you can read about it in the one of the little handouts. And we're doing this because it's Women's History Month. And why I didn't know that, I'll have to apologize to my wife tonight. And so the money in the basket right here. The money in the basket goes to sustaining the mission of this congregation. The money in the cup goes to the special project that we're going to be supporting this month. So I think I've already got 4 volunteers. That's cool.
Just briefly, just to emphasize, this is the first week for the STAR project. There's a dollar for dollar match, so for 4 weeks we're collecting for the STAR project, and the last week of the month will be for the Human Rights Campaign. I did forget to announce that for those not with us today in person, there is an online link for both one-time and regular donations. And so for your prayer and your presence and your service and your gifts, we are truly grateful. It's a time for announcements. Okay. Along with the Citizens for a Sustainable Hobart, and in conjunction with our church and other collection sites in Hobart, we have collected 420 pounds of the 1,000-pound goal that needs to be met by July to make a bench for the Shirley Hines Land Trust. So please keep any plastic bags and wrappers that you're using, and consider if you have relatives or friends who could collect their plastic bags for you and bring to our collection box. Also, Faith in Action will be offering you all a chance to sign a letter after service that we adopted from a letter crafted by the Unitarian Universalists for Social Justice.
We will attempt to deliver this letter in person to Todd Young's office in Valparaiso. Cindy will read the letter here.
Can you hear me? All right. I was really moved, and it really stood up for me when we did our little discussion when Reverend Tom asked us about how we can tell our relationship with the past and future is thriving. And I realized that my relationship with the future thrives more when I take action in the present. And on Thursday night, when I went to the On Tyranny group, I was really excited when Tracy said, like, he's a man of action. So not just reading a book, but what actions are we taking? And fortunately, our Faith in Action Ministry has already decided that we wanted to send this letter, but we want you to hear what we are sending. And if you are in agreement, please add your name to this letter to Senator Young. We are profoundly concerned and deeply disappointed that Congress is advancing budget proposals that will harm American families and households by taking away health care and nutritional assistance to pay for tax cuts for the wealthy and billionaires and to fund a counterproductive immigration agenda. In our faith tradition, we uphold religious values of interdependence, generosity, and equity, and we see none of these in the proposals discussed. Inflation is still a threat to household economies, food prices are rising, and reliable health care is never easy or cheap. We oppose the $230 billion in cuts to SNAP described in the House budget proposal and the cuts the Senate is contemplating. Congress must not reduce the meager daily SNAP benefit, nor should Congress pay technocratic games with the eligibility criteria and terms. To be permitted eligibility 3 months out of every 3 years would be a cruel rule. Our displeasure and outrage are commensurate with the boundless audacity on display. Those are calories taken away from kids during their developmental years, and that is staple food gone from pantries in every corner of America. This budget proposal will make people hungry. We ask you to oppose any budget proposals or legislative packages that cut SNAP benefits from recipients now or needy people in the future. We are equally dismayed by the House budget proposal's estimated $880 billion in cuts for Medicaid. Medicaid and CHIP serve millions of children, people with disabilities, and elders with low incomes. We understand that 23.6% of congressional districts nationwide get Medicaid. That means a lot of our neighbors will struggle with health care, again, to fund tax cuts for the wealthy and billionaires. We ask you to oppose any budget proposals or legislative packages that include cuts to Medicaid or CHIP in current proposals or negotiations later this year. We find this approach to budget and program policy unconscionable. In particular, this approach is part of a design to offer more tax cuts to the wealthy and billionaires and fund expensive immigration detentions, which is horrible, especially since even your own Congressional Budget Office, the CBO, says that on average, the increased economic output generated from $1 of corporate tax cuts is a paltry 20 cents. In contrast, on average, the $1 of direct payments to working families, such as a refundable monthly child tax credit, yields $1.25 of increased economic output. It is better to focus on enhancing the return on taxpayer investment with productivity improvements. Programs like the child tax credit, the earned income tax credit, SNAP, CHIP, and Medicaid can all play a vital role in assisting people in challenging circumstances to attend activities that will improve their lives. Concentrate on that. We urge you to oppose legislation, budget proposals, reconciliation negotiations, or amendments to non-germane vehicles that cut SNAP, CHIP, or Medicaid. Sincerely, the congregants of the First Unitarian Church of Northwest Indiana.
One more. The Northwest Indiana Islamic Center in Crown Point would like to invite us to an interfaith iftar and share a meal as they break their fast at sunset next Saturday, March 8th at 5 p.m. We are not being asked to fast, just to join them in the spirit of community and understanding. There is a QR code on the screen out in the parish hall or in the upcoming newsletter to scan and RSVP. See Peter Michelle for more information. Also, you may want to look at one of the enclosures here. We've got a lot going on in our church here. I'm not going to read it all, but there's game night, drumming circle, spirit equinox ritual and potluck, 60 minutes for God, and trivia night. So, flip it over, I'm told. Okay. Oh, rummage sale. Okay, sorry about that. And which is what, April 25th and 26th. Okay, thank you, Joan. Talk to Joan for more details, I guess. What? All right, and the Bethune ritual and potluck. Oh, also a plant sale on May 10th. Okay, never mind. Okay. I told Barb if I had any trouble up here, I knew I would get help from the congregation. And so it came to be. Okay. Now please rise in body and spirit and join in singing number 348, Guide My Feet. Please be seated. Our closing words. Lead me from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead me from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead me from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe. I invite you now to join me in reciting all the words of the scroll.
Forget your perfect offering. Forget your perfect offering. Ring the bells that you can ring. Ring the bells that you can ring. There is a crack in everything. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. 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 Forget your perfect offering. Forget your perfect offering. Ring the bells that you can ring. Ring the bells that you can ring. There is a crack in everything. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in. That's how the light gets in.
Well, that was a big wow. All right. Now it's time to extinguish our chalice. And I invite you now to join me in reciting all the words on the screen to accompany our extinguishing of the chalice. May we continue to carry in our hearts the light of truth, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment until we are together again.
So we'll be having a conversation about the worship service up here in 15 minutes. So 15 minutes from now, if you would like to join us, just grab a couple chairs and we'll chat.